All right, teachers, my name is Scott Mitchell. Welcome, students. Glad to see everybody. I'm here at the Silver River Museum for today's session of Museum Mysteries. And if you were able to join me last time, our mystery object was actually a Spanish conquistador's helmet. It was a big shiny thing that the very earliest Spanish soldiers and explorers would have worn on their heads for protection as they were coming into Florida. They weren't quite sure who they would meet. So they were soldiers, they wore armor. Today's museum mystery object is still from the Spanish historic period in Florida. You know, the Spanish were the first settlers to arrive in Florida, the first Europeans. There were lots of people here already. There were Native Americans here, but the Spanish explorers were the first Europeans to come to Florida about 500 years ago. So this first quarter of school is all about Hispanic heritage, and that's what we're talking about today. So I am going to shift cameras just real quickly. Before I do that, if you all had a chance to download and print these little worksheets, these are helpful for today. There's a place for the students to record observations or maybe some questions they might have. And then we're going to try to figure out what this object is. If you don't have it, it's okay. It's just extra, and you can always download it later if you want to do that. So let me switch cameras and I will show you our mystery object today. Now, you may have an idea of what it is right when you see it. Some people will have an idea of what it is right away. And we're going to talk about it just a little bit. So I want to describe it, and then teachers, I want the students to discuss this a little bit and send me some feedback. Send me some thoughts about what they think it is. So I'm back here in the back room of the Silver River Museum. This is it's about the size of a little bit bigger than a basketball. Let's say a little bit bigger than a basketball. It's got a distinctive shape. It's made out of metal. I believe the metal is bronze. Let me adjust the camera here. There we go. I believe the metal is bronze. It is very heavy. So, you know, when you pick it up, it's you have to pick it up with both hands. And I already see some comments coming in. It looks like a bell, Miss Danielson's class says. And I think you were on the right track. It certainly does look like a bell. But let me tell you a little bit more about it. It was found in the Ocklawaha River back in the 1960s, about 50 or 60 years ago, by a couple of local river divers. These guys had scuba gear and they were under the water going along the bottom of the Ocklawaha River looking for Indian artifacts like spear points or fossil mammoth teeth, old bottles, things like that. They were looking for treasures in the river. And lo and behold, along they're swimming and they see this bell. It is a bell. You were right. It's laying on the bottom of the river. So they bring it up. I see the Liberty Bell. It's not the Liberty Bell, but the next comment says a religious bell. We are getting warmer. All right, this is good. So they bring this bell up. At first, they thought it was a ship's bell from one of the old steam-powered paddle boats that used to come up the Ocklawaha River and the Silver River back in the 1800s. They bring this bell up and they think they've found a ship's bell. And they put it in their boat and they take it home and they clean it. And they realize when they clean it and look at it closely, it has a big cross right here on the front. And that's very clearly a religious symbol. So you see from Ms. Strong's class that it's a religious bell, and we're on the right track. So it is a religious bell. It's from a church, but it's from a very, very old church. And this is a very rare bell indeed. There are few artifacts like this anywhere in the eastern part of the country. And the reason is because the people who were using these bells, when they left, they would always take these bells with them. They were important items. And so how we found it in the river, we're not quite sure how it ended up there, but let me tell you the story behind this museum mystery object. So I'm going to switch back to, oh, well, before I do that, I want to show you some other clues here. Along with this bell, there are artifacts, and artifacts are things made by people. So here we see some little stone arrow tips, some broken Indian pottery, iron nails. This is a little glass bead. It's pretty small, but it's a little glass bead that you would wear in a necklace. Pieces of Spanish pottery. Over here we have a few more glass beads, some more Spanish pottery, some Indian pottery. And this is where we're starting to get into a little bit of the clues that tell us about why this bell was found in the Silver River. So I want to go back to my camera. And you can see in the painting behind me, here's a Spanish ship that's just arrived. The first Spaniards arrived in the year 1513. And the soldiers and the explorers are getting off the ship and they're coming in to explore the land. The original Spanish explorers were looking for gold and silver. They did not find gold and silver, but they realized pretty quickly that they wanted to stay in Florida and keep control of Florida, because up to the north, like Georgia, further to the north, were English colonies. And the Spanish and the English didn't really get along. So Florida became kind of a buffer area or a wall to keep those pesky Englishmen from coming down into Florida, which was Spanish territory. If you asked a Spaniard anyway. The Native Americans would have said this is our territory, but that's a point that they argued. So I have a PowerPoint and I'm going to tell you about this bell. This bell, here's our conquistador helmet. That's from a couple of weeks ago. That was our first museum mystery object. And the guy on the left on the horse is named Bill. He is a reenactor that gets dressed up as a conquistador, and he goes around and tells people about Spanish history, which is interesting. You don't meet people like him very often, but our museum mystery object this week is the bell here in the museum. It's bronze, I said that, and it has a big cross on it, and you can see the little sketch on the right hand. That shows you the cross pretty clearly. So when the first Spanish explorers came to Florida, they brought their religion with them. They were Catholics. This is a certain type of Christianity, and they brought priests with them. And this is a painting of what one of the very first church services might have looked like on the beach of Florida when they landed. Now, this is a very fancy painting. It probably wasn't this colorful or elaborate. You can see some soldiers there. You can see some Native Americans off to the left, and even a ship way in the background on the horizon. But the point here is that those early Spanish explorers brought their religion with them, and they pretty quickly started going off to large Indian villages to share their religion. They wanted to get the Native Americans to join their church, the Catholic Church. And so priests that were called missionaries would go off to large Indian villages, and they would move in basically and build a church and talk to the Native Americans, make friends with them, try to help them, and try to convert them over to the Catholic faith. So here in Marion County, and in fact, all the way between St. Augustine and Tallahassee, there's this old road that stretched between those two old Spanish towns. And there were mission churches built at Indian villages all along that road. So each one of these little these are actually red bells, believe it or not. Each one of these little red symbols was the location of a mission church. And remember, this was 400 or 500 years ago. So we're talking 1600s, this was happening. There were 3 of these mission churches here in Marion County in the 1600s, and they were located along the Ocklawaha River. So now we're getting closer to why that bell might have ended up in the river. This is a painting of what one of those missions would have looked like. And so in the foreground, this large building right in the middle next to the tree, that's the church. And this would have been the priest's house, and some gardens out back. And all these homes back here in the distance, those were Indian houses. There's a big game field, a circular game field, like a courtyard to the village. And then this big funny building with the smoke coming out of it, that's a meeting house or a council house for the Native Americans. So up near Tallahassee, there is a place. It's the location of one of these old missions, and archaeologists went and they excavated it. And they found stains in the soil and artifacts, and they were able to figure out where the buildings were and how large the buildings were and how they were built. And this is a reconstruction. This is a modern replica of the old Spanish church. at the mission site up near Tallahassee. It's called Mission San Luis. And teachers, you can look this up. They have a wonderful educational website. It's spelled like Lewis, so it's Mission San Luis, or basically the Church of St. Louis. This is a large building, and I believe this building was used, the original, in the 1600s. This is the inside. You can see a priest there holding mass. It's very large and fancy. These were large structures. So this is an example of what one of those old Spanish churches would have looked like, where they would have used an artifact like this bell. So here's a couple people that would have lived there at the mission village. Folks would have been born there and lived there all their lives. They were farmers and probably spoke Native American language and Spanish. And this was going on right here in Marion County in the 1600s. So it's pretty interesting. If you've ever gone down the Ocklawaha, chances are, in a boat, chances are you've passed by one of those areas where the old mission churches were built. Now, teachers, let's have your students look at this photo of these objects. We're going to talk a little bit about how we know where these old mission churches were. So the blue and white colorful plate on the right is a certain type of pottery that the Spaniards used to make years ago called majolica. This is a majolica plate or a bowl, and it would be used for eating, basically. It's it's a serving plate. Let's have the students look at these little pieces off to the left and tell me what they think those things are. They have little numbers next to them, and there's a scale so you can tell how big they are. But what do we think these are, and why are they important? Why are they part of this Spanish mission? What do they have to do with the bell? So if you can have them look at those, and then let's have some comments come in. If you think you know what they're for, send me some suggestions. In pieces of a plate, I see from Miss Danielson's class. Pieces of Spanish plates, to be exact. And this old Spanish pottery is kind of like cars. If you see a modern brand new car, you can tell it's a brand new car. And if you see a car that's like 40 years old, it's an old beat up junker, you can tell it's an old car just by the way they're made, right? The design, the way they look. Well, Spanish pottery is the same way. They made certain types of pottery back in the 1600s and 1700s and 1800s. So if we find pieces of those Spanish plates and bowls, Miss Sutterfield's class has it down, we know that we're in a place where there were Spanish priests or explorers from that time period. So the pottery almost tells us how old the archaeological site is. Now, archaeologists are people who dig up places where people used to live long ago, sometimes even underwater archaeology like shipwrecks, but they're looking for clues, things that people left behind. And a good example why we would do this is the Native Americans, those Timucuan Indians. Before the Spaniards came to Florida, those Native Americans did not have any reading or writing, so they didn't write their own histories down. And if we want to learn how they lived, we have to go and find the clues they left behind. Things like little pieces of broken Indian pottery or arrow tips. This tells us basically how they were making a living, and we can learn more about their lifestyle through archaeology. So the archaeologists have found first the bell was found by the two river divers, and later archaeologists started looking through old Spanish history books, and the Spaniards would write down, we had a church here and we had a church here and there was a road between them. Well, there are plenty of these mission church locations that have not been found. So when archaeologists get a clue, when two guys in scuba gear find a mission bell in the river, the Ocklawaha River, the archaeologists know to go and search nearby. And so that's how we learn a little bit more about Florida history. So on the back side of your worksheet, we have some questions. We've probably already discussed the answers to a few of them. What does the decoration on the bell tell us about its purpose? There's a cross on it. I think we had some comments earlier that it was a religious bell. That's correct. So the bell would have been there at the church. The priests would have rang the bell to signal to all the people to come to church, or if there was a special occasion, or perhaps a problem or an emergency, or they wanted to get everyone's attention, they could ring that bell. It's very, very loud. Describe how archaeologists found the place where the bell was originally used. We talked about how they would go and actually dig holes. They take the sand out of the hole in the ground and they sift it through a screen, and the screen catches any of those little artifacts like the Indian spear points or the beads, the glass beads. That's how they find those clues. You, as an archaeologist, you end up digging more holes that don't have anything in them, and you can prove that there's nothing here. It's not as exciting, but a lot of times you're proving where things aren't. And then when you do find some clues, then you get to excavate and learn more. All right, I have a question here. Do archaeologists have any guesses on how the bell might have ended up in the river? Well, we have guesses, but we're not sure because nobody was there that's around nowadays, obviously. And the missionaries, the Spanish priests, they didn't write that part of the story down. So there's a couple of possibilities. The mission closed, there was lots of unrest, and the Native Americans were very unhappy with the Spaniards. There were problems, they weren't getting along, and the Spanish closed the church, and there was even some fighting going on back and forth. This was in 1656. So we think that the priests left probably in a hurry. They may have dropped the bell in the river. They would have gotten into a boat. Those rivers were like highways back then. They didn't have cars and railroads and trucks and things like that. So they would have either had to walk, ride a horse, or get in a boat. They probably got in a boat. They may have dropped the bell in the river, or they might have thrown the bell in the river on purpose so nobody could get it and abuse it. Or perhaps the Native Americans got the bell and threw it in the river as a sign of disrespect because they were upset with the priests. But we don't know for sure. So they are just guesses. We have a question from Ms. Strong's class. How heavy is the bell? I would say it's 15 pounds. So it's pretty heavy. If you were picking up a medium-sized dog, right, in your arms to carry it, someplace to the vet's office, it's about like that. It's probably 15, 20 pounds. It's heavy. Okay, it's made from bronze. This leads us to our next question. How do we know the bell was not made in Florida? Teachers, let's have the students talk about this a little bit. How do we know that that bell was not made here? We're pretty sure it wasn't. There's a few reasons why. Okay, I have a response from Ms. Carson's class. It has Mexican writing. It doesn't have any writing on it. It just has that cross as a decoration. So there is no writing. And so that's not correct. I have another response from Ms. Danielson class. It says there were Indians here and they wouldn't know how to make it. That's correct. There's two parts to that though. The Spanish brought it with them. Ms. Turner's class, that's true. We know that the Spaniards brought it with them because there's no way that the Native Americans could have made this bell. And here's why. First of all, they didn't know how to make metal bells. And more importantly, we don't have the metals that you would have to dig out of the ground and melt in a big furnace, a big oven to get them into liquid form like lava, right? We don't have copper and zinc, which is used to make bronze. We don't have those metals in Florida. They don't occur here. So there's no way that the Native Americans could have made this bell. That means it had to have come from Spain or perhaps Mexico or Peru, one of the countries to the south where the Spanish had already settled and were making things out of bronze like bells and cannons and things like that. So bronze isn't native to Florida. That is exactly right, Ms. Sutterfield's class. So you guys are practically future archaeologists already. If you want to see the bell in person, and I said earlier that this is a very rare bell, it is indeed rare. There are no mission bells like this, old Spanish mission bells, in museums anywhere in the eastern part of the United States. You might have to go all the way to California to see a mission bell sitting in a museum. And the reason is, like I said earlier, those Spanish priests would take these bells with them. They were very important. It was almost like their Bible. It was a very important artifact to them. So they would have taken the bell with them under normal circumstances. So this is a really rare artifact. If you want to see it, You can come to the museum on Saturdays and Sundays. We're open from 9 to 4 each Saturday and Sunday. And hopefully, one day before too long, we will be open for field trips again, and we'll get to start to see students back. So we're looking forward to that day. So teachers, if you could do me a favor before we log off, if we have any more questions, I'm happy to answer them. But if you could send me through chat your name and the school and your grade, that will help me keep track of who I'm talking to. And it allows us to send a report, downtown, we're seeing X number of students, which helps. So we would appreciate that if you could send me in chat your name, school, and grade level. And then if the students have any more questions, happy to try to answer them. I will tell you, if this is the first time you've logged in for Museum Mysteries, it's only the second one. We're going to do this every other week. So in 2 weeks, I'll be back with another mystery object. It will have to do with Spanish heritage. And the second quarter has to do with Native American history. The third quarter is African American history. And the fourth quarter is military history in Florida. So each quarter throughout the school year, we will be bringing you different objects, or perhaps maybe a place or even a person, like a guest expert speaker. So I hope that you all will join me. Oh, I see one more question. How old is the mission bell? Well, the mission that this bell was used at, named San Luis de Ocali, operated between 1620 and 1656. So 1620, I'd say it's about 500 years old, 400 or 500 years old. It's pretty old. It's not the oldest thing we have in the museum, but it's one of the rarest. Okay, how long ago did they find the bell? Good question. It was sometime in the late 1960s, 1968, 1966, somewhere around there. The two men who found the bell were local guys. They lived here in Ocala, and their names were Ben Waller and Billy Franklin. Those were the two men that found the bell as scuba divers. And I actually got a chance to talk with Mr. Franklin, and he told me the story about it. And he said they thought it was a ship's bell when they found it originally. All right. Well, I hope you all enjoyed the Spanish mission bell. I'll show it to you one more time. If you like bells, it's really an interesting bell. Okay, one more question. How come there's no rust on it after being in the water for so long? Bronze doesn't rust the same way that steel rusts. So bronze will sometimes turn a little green. It'll have almost like a green rust instead of a red-brown rust. So steel and iron will rust a different way. That's how most people think of rust. But bronze doesn't rust the same way because it's a different type of metal. And I think that the men who found it probably cleaned it gently with a scrub brush and took some of the corrosion off of it. So it says, is there writing inside the cross of the bell? There's not. No, it's just decorative stamps that make the cross. Let's see, we have a question about whether we can see it up close. I'm glad you guys are interested. Let me change the camera and we'll see how the quality is on this camera. You can see a little bit of greenish, rusty stuff here. That's probably as close to rust that we have. Rust. There's a little chip out of it down here. And then up here these are holes where it would have been hung to the framework that they used to suspend it. I apologize for all the jerky camera movements. All right. Let me take this camera off. And I'll do one more thing quickly here. Oh, goodness. There we go. All right. Let me. Tripod's giving me trouble. I'll bring this camera over. We'll see if this helps. You can see the cross a little bit better there. And there it is from the side. You can see the three holes where they would have hung it, probably with heavy ropes. That's the Spanish mission bell. I'm using a laptop, so it's a little funny to hold. Okay, let's see. One more question. How long do you think it would have taken them to make the bell? Well, it all depends on how easily they could find the minerals to dig out of the ground to make the bronze. Once they make that bronze, they have to melt it down and get it in a liquid form. It's super, super hot like lava. And then they would pour it into a form of the shape of a bell. And when it cools off, you would have a bell. And then they have to kind of clean it up and they take the form away. So I don't know exactly how long, but I would think probably altogether, there's probably a month of work, maybe. I guess it depends on how long it takes them to dig the minerals out of the ground. That would probably be the hard part. And then just because you make the bell doesn't mean it's going to turn out. Sometimes it wouldn't turn out properly and you'd have to start over. You'd melt down the bronze and start over again. So it's called casting. You cast the bell from a mold. But that's how they make bronze bells, and they still make bronze bells today. In fact, if you go to St. Augustine, where the big Catholic church is over in St. Augustine, they actually have bronze mission bells up in the top of the church. They're much newer than this bell, but it's the same idea, and they still use them. If you're in St. Augustine for the day, visiting the fort or having ice cream on St. George Street, you might be lucky enough to hear the mission or the church bells ring there in St. Augustine. Okay, well, students, very good answers. I hope that some of you might be interested in archaeology and old Spanish missions. You can do all kinds of research on that. And teachers, don't forget to look up online the website for the Mission of San Luis up near Tallahassee. It's actually like a state park. It's a rebuilt Spanish mission for educational groups. So thank you all for joining me. Come back in 2 weeks. Ms. Benavides and myself will be sending out updates, and in 2 weeks, I'll have a whole brand new museum mystery object, and I see lots of thank yous coming in from you guys. I appreciate that. Thank you for joining me. And so I hope everyone has a good rest of the day, and I will see you soon. Bye.